I was also wondering, what is it that you're trying to protect the groundwater from?
The unforeseen. No one decades ago could have imagined that oil would play the role that it has in our lives today. When oil was in some cases less than $1 a gallon or pennies a gallon, it was more of its spill upon the waters we were concerned about. We made good laws which were flexible and have reached into the future from those times 35 years ago. I mean, it's amazing to me a man like Harrison Richardson could ever die, frankly. I mean, he was very far-sighted and very thoughtful, and he wrote tough laws that were flexible. So I think if we could figure a way to provide the protection to groundwater needed that is done in other states, given the fact that our groundwater is desirable to a lot of people, and certainly to ourselves, we can find the same kind of laws which would be flexible and protective and reach into the future for the unforeseen that you and I couldn't sit here and predict. Just like I'd never heard of MTBE till I took my seat in the legislature, nor heard the late Representative Verdi Tripp. But good things came of the tragedy. And yes, many important protections in Maine law, hard won and on the books for some time, do apply to surface water and groundwater, that is, both to the seen and the unseen water resource. Notably, of course, the Great Ponds Acts, that is, as you would know, we own the bottom of the Great Ponds as defined, and the bottoms of the tidal rivers as defined. But most notably, the oil discharge laws of the state of Maine, which prohibit discharge of any oily waste into the waters of Maine. It is a profoundly simple law of only a couple of sentences, but it was an enormous struggle to get put on the books 35 years ago, and it has served us enormously well. The current Maine state law regarding oil discharge for both private and public water resources says it is, quote, impossible, unquote, to really affect just your own water in the state of Maine, because all water is interconnected. And so therefore, we must protect all water in the name of the state. You will find this, and your analyst shall bring it to you, in the 38 MRSA. Among them paragraphs 543, which states very bluntly, all water is a public resource. All water is a public interest. It is a public resource, and groundwater is also a fragile resource and cannot be compartmentalized, quote unquote. You can't separate my water from yours just because the fence runs between us. It's continued in 38 MRSA, sections 401 to 409, which states very bluntly the protection of groundwater resources is critical to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the people of Maine, unquote. These are very good laws. What I'm hoping is that we may bring them to full bear, using LD 837, for that water which you may see and that water which you do not see, surface water and groundwater. All laws that apply to one should apply to the other, because, as I have said, each is only one half of the same water cycle: surface, subsurface, groundwater, above groundwater, visible and not visible. Maine law should be explicit and state explicitly that all such protections apply to both halves of the resource. If, as some will maintain, Maine law does so already, then there is no harm to say it explicitly in a single sentence elsewhere in the law. If it is implicit in existing law, making it clear and explicit could only be helpful. The Underground Oil Storage Facilities and Groundwater Protection Act states bluntly, under 38 MRSA, subsection 561 to 570, that protection of this resource is of the highest importance. And it does so because of a terrible thing which happened when I was a freshman legislator before, not because I was a freshman legislator before, but during the time when MBTE, methyl butyl tertiary ethyl, burned into my memory, which was added to gasoline by state law in the winter, because it upped your octane and boosted your output, was found to be inimical to groundwater. Once it got in groundwater, it could not be extracted. It connected very quickly to groundwater because of its molecular structure. It was like a lawyer on Madonna's divorce. You could never separate it once it had begun. My seatmate at that time, Verdi Tripp, a fine man from Topsom who passed on just last year, was a newspaper printer. And yet he, as a citizen legislator, which is what we all are, detected that there was something odd in this stuff, MTBE, and made it his special cause. Most of the good laws that we have because of that tragedy became because of that one man who found that this plume of MTBE could spread from either a known or an unknown source infinitely into the water plume. And it has done so in several terrible examples, both in Mechanic Falls, Westbrook, and other towns. Its exact source has never been nailed down. It seems to have come from the general direction of a couple of gas stations. No one will know, but the plume continues to spread, and one by one, the wells in the area can no longer be used. For the rest of people's habitants of some of the houses in those towns, they will drink and wash from a jug. Groundwater cannot be compartmentalized, belongs to us all. Some who will come to the podium behind me will say, well, if you pass any laws restricting it, though that was a tragedy, that what you're doing is making a takings of the value of my property. I would argue it is not a takings, it's a protection. The existing groundwater laws we've had for many years prove the value of that protection. In the same way that surface water law has protected surface water law, protected those who enjoy surface water all these years, it is not a taking. In fact, it is an enhancement of law, of things that you love, the lakes, the streams, the ponds that we live next to. All of it has proven its value. It's just we're talking about both the visible and the invisible. If the Great Ponds Protection Act and if the prohibition on oily waste going into the water stream or into the ground had been takings in the sense that we were depriving somebody of the value of their water, then landowners would have protested long ago and the courts would have spoken long ago. Absolutely to the contrary. Opponents may say, well, there's plenty of water, so why worry? These laws aren't needed. Well, yes, Canada, New England, and Maine in the Northeast Shield do have significant recharge rates of water. It is soaking the earth and running in the Kennebec River outside right now, this very sunny spring day. But it is not so in the rest of the United States, not so in the rest of the Northeast, and certainly not so even in the states just to the south of us. And yes, there are conflicts about water in Maine. Maine farmers needing irrigation assurance have had tussles in recent years over water diversion from protected salmon river runs. But it's been worked out because in Maine, reasonable use does include, in law, irrigation in current law today. Mainers knew and know and put in law the value of a good thing. It is not the plenty, not the quantity. It is not the plenty we are concerned with. It's the protection. To give the same protection which Maine has given to surface water so well on all these past years, to extend it to the future. It is what makes the water desirable. In conclusion, they may say, well, what's the big deal? What's the current harm? Point out to me why we need any law at all. These same arguments were raised 30 and 35 years ago when the Great Ponds Act was passed and when some of our very first surface water protection was promulgated and when the oil discharge laws were written and passed in this legislature, much of it done by a Republican representative, Harrison Richardson, who just passed on and who I wish I could have known. We talked only over the phone. I never actually met him. But the world was just in those days turning its eyes to Maine for clean air, clean water, green vistas, waterfront lands. Maine passed the Great Ponds Act and the oil discharge laws as protections against the unforeseen, prudent protections that have in time paid off. They still pay us off today. No one comes to you asking to repeal them now, the Great Ponds Act or the oil discharge laws. Maine is now looking for the last act in the saga of the United States Clean Water Act. It was begun by Ed Muskie so long ago, when the sense of stewardship and the cycle of things and the protections a parent that owes his children's inheritance all first became apparent in our environmental laws, even in our landed plenty. Ed Muskie fathered the Clean Water Act. Senators Mitchell and Cohen furthered it. Senators today, Snowe and Collins, continue to do so. And so I ask that we, in this legislature, in our own roles, now play our part in completing that cycle. Incidentally, I just learned on the way in, this is World Water Week.